A plurality voting system is a voting system in which each voter is allowed to vote for only one candidate, and the candidate who polls more votes than any other candidate is elected. In a system based on single-member districts, it may be called first-past-the-post, single-choice voting, simple plurality, or relative simple majority. In a system based on multi-member districts, it may be referred to as winner-takes-all or bloc voting. The system is often used to elect members of a legislative assembly or executive offices. It is the most common form of the system, used in Canada, the lower house in India, the United Kingdom, and most elections in the United States. Plural voting is distinguished from a majority voting system, in which to win, a candidate must receive an absolute majority of votes, i.e., more votes than all other candidates combined. Both systems may use single-member or multi-member constituencies, in what is referred to as an exhaustive counting system, where one member is elected at a time and the process repeated until the number of the vacancies is filled. In some countries such as France, a two-ballot or runoff election plurality system is used. This may require 2 rounds of voting. If on the first round no candidate receives over 50% of the votes, then a second round takes place, consisting of the 2 highest voted candidates in the first round. This ensures that the winner gains a majority of votes in the second round. Alternatively, all candidates above a certain threshold in the first round may compete in the second round. If there are more than 2 candidates standing, then a plurality vote may decide the result. In political science, the use of the plurality voting system with multiple, single-winner constituencies to elect a multi-member body is often referred to as single-member district plurality, or SMDP. This combination is also variously referred to as winner-takes-all to contrast it with proportional representation systems. This term is sometimes also used to refer to elections for multiple winners in a particular constituency using bloc voting. Plurality, majority systems in the broader family of voting systems. Most experts group electoral systems into 3 general categories: proportional representation systems, mixed-member systems, and plurality, majoritarian systems. Voting. Plurality voting is used for local and/or national elections in 43 of the 193 countries of the United Nations. Plurality voting is particularly prevalent in the United Kingdom and former British colonies, including the United States, Canada and India. In single-winner plurality voting, each voter is allowed to vote for only one candidate, and the winner of the election is whichever candidate represents a plurality of voters, that is, whoever received the largest number of votes. This makes the plurality voting system among the simplest of all voting systems for voters and vote-counting officials. In an election for a legislative body, each voter in a given geographically defined electoral district votes for one candidate from a list of candidates competing to represent that district. Under the plurality system, the winner of the election then becomes the representative of the entire electoral district, and serves with representatives of other electoral districts. In an election for a single seat, such as president in a presidential system, the same style of ballot is used, and the candidate who received the largest number of votes represents the entire population. In the 2-round voting system, usually the 2 highest polling candidates in the first ballot progress to the second-round runoff ballot. In a multiple-member plurality election, the counting of the ballot uses an exhaustive iteration process using the same ballot papers to elect one person each iteration for each vacant position. Ballot types. Generally, plurality ballots can be categorized into two forms. The simplest form is a blank ballot where the name of the candidate is written in by hand. A more structured ballot will list all the candidates and allow a mark to be made next to the name of a single candidate. However, a structured ballot can also include space for a write-in candidate. Examples of plurality voting. General elections in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, like the United States and Canada, uses single-member districts as the base for national elections. Each electoral district chooses one member of parliament, i.e., the candidate that gets the most votes, whether he gets 50% of the votes cast or not. In 1992, for example, a Liberal Democrat in Scotland won with just 26% of the votes. This system of single-member districts with plurality winners tends to produce two large political parties. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland used the first-past-the-post system for general elections in the UK, but use versions of proportional representation for local elections and European elections. The countries that inherited the British majoritarian system tend toward two large parties, one left, the other right, such as the U.S. Democrats and Republicans. Canada is an exception with three major political parties consisting of the New Democratic Party, which is to the left, the Conservative Party, which is to the right, and the Liberal Party, which is slightly off-center to the left. A fourth party that no longer has major party status is the separatist bloc QUE acute BE acute COI's party, which is territorial and concentrated in Quebec. New Zealand used the British system, and it too yielded two large parties. It also left many New Zealanders unhappy, because other viewpoints were ignored, so its parliament in 1993 adopted a new electoral law, modelled on Germany's system of proportional representation with a partial selection by constituencies. New Zealand soon developed a more complex party system. After the 2015 elections in the United Kingdom, there were calls from UKIP to change to proportional representation after receiving 3,881,129 votes but only one MP. The Green Party was similarly underrepresented. This contrasted greatly with the SNP in Scotland, who only received 1,454,436 votes but won 56 seats due to more concentrated support. Example: imagine that Tennessee is having an election on the location of its capital. The population of Tennessee is concentrated around its four major cities, which are spread throughout the state. For this example, suppose that the entire electorate lives in these four cities and that everyone wants to live as near to the capital as possible. The candidates for the capital are Memphis, the state's largest city, with 42% of the voters, but located far from the other cities; Nashville, with 26% of the voters, near the center of the state; Knoxville, with 17% of the voters; Chattanooga, with 15% of the voters. The preferences of the voters would be divided like this. If each voter in each city naively selects one city on the ballot, then Memphis will be selected, as it has the most votes. Note that this system does not require that the winner have a majority but only a plurality. Memphis wins because it has the most votes, even though 58% of the voters in this example preferred Memphis least. Notice that this problem does not hold anymore in the two-round system, in which Nashville would have one. Disadvantages: tactical voting. To a much greater extent than many other electoral methods, plurality electoral systems encourage tactical voting techniques, like compromising. Voters are pressured to vote for one of the two candidates they predict are most likely to win, even if the true preference is neither, because a vote for any other candidate will likely be wasted and have no impact on the final result. In the Tennessee example, if all the voters for Chattanooga and Knoxville had instead voted for Nashville, then Nashville would have won. This would only have been the third choice for those voters, but voting for the respective first choices actually results in the fourth choice being elected. The difficulty is sometimes summed up in an extreme form as all votes for anyone other than the second placer votes for the winner, because by voting for other candidates, they have denied those votes to the second place candidate who could have won had they received them. It is often claimed by United States Democrats that Democrat Al Gore lost the 2000 presidential election to Republican George W. Bush because some voters on the left voted for Ralph Nader of the Green Party, who exit polls indicated would have preferred Gore at 45% to Bush at 27%, with the rest not voting in Nader's absence. Such a mentality is reflected by elections in Puerto Rico and its three principal voter groups, the Independentistas, the Populares, and the Estadistas. Historically, there has been a tendency for Independentista voters to elect popular candidates and policies. This phenomenon is responsible for some popular victories, even though the Estadistas have the most voters on the island. It is so widely recognized that the Puerto Ricans sometimes call the Independentistas who vote for the Populares melons, because the fruit is green on the outside but red on the inside. Because voters have to predict in advance who the top two candidates will be, this can cause significant perturbation to the system. Substantial power is given to the media. Some voters will tend to believe the media's assertions as to who the leading contenders are likely to be in the election. Even voters who distrust the media will know that other voters to believe the media, and therefore those candidates who receive the most media attention will nonetheless be the most popular and thus most likely to be in one of the top two. A newly appointed candidate, who is in fact supported by the majority of voters, may be considered to not be likely to become one of the top two candidates. Thus, they will receive a reduced number of votes, which will then give them a reputation as a low poller in future elections. Compounding the problem, the system may promote votes against more so than votes for. In the UK, entire campaigns have been organised with the aim of voting against the Conservative Party by voting either Labour or Liberal Democrat. For example, in a constituency held by the Conservatives, with the Liberal Democrats as the second-place party and the Labour Party in third, Labour supporters might be urged to vote for the Liberal Democrat candidate than their own candidate on the basis that Labour supporters would prefer an MP from a competing left Liberal party than a Conservative one. Similarly, in Labour, Lib Dem marginals, where the Conservatives are third, Conservative voters may be encouraged or tempted to vote Lib Dem to defeat Labour. If enough voters use this tactic, the first-past-the-post system becomes, effectively, runoff voting, a completely different system, where the first round is held in the court of public opinion. A good example of this is the Winchester by-election, 1997. Proponents of other single-winner voting systems argue that the proposals would reduce the need for tactical voting and reduce the spoiler effect. Examples include the commonly used two-round system of runoffs and instant runoff voting, along with less tested systems such as approval voting and condorcet methods. Fewer political parties do. Vige's law is a theory that constituencies that use first-past-the-post systems will have a two-party system, given enough time. First-past-the-post tends to reduce the number of political parties to a greater extent than most other methods do, making it more likely that a single party will hold a majority of legislative seats. FPTP's tendency toward few parties and more frequent one-party rules can also produce government that may not consider as wide a range of perspectives and concerns. It is entirely possible that a voter finds all major parties to have similar views on issues and that a voter does not have a meaningful way of expressing a dissenting representing opinion through his vote. As fewer choices are offered to voters, voters may vote for a candidate although they disagree with him, because they disagree even more with his opponents. Consequently, candidates will less closely reflect the viewpoints of those who vote for them. Furthermore, one-party rule is more likely to lead to radical changes in government policy even though the changes are favored only by a plurality or a bare majority of the voters, whereas a multi-party system usually requires greater consensus in order to make dramatic changes in policy. Wasted votes are votes cast for losing candidates or votes cast for winning candidates in excess of the number required for victory. For example, in the UK general election of 2005, 52% of votes were cast for losing candidates and 18% were excess votes, a total of 70% wasted votes. This is perhaps the most fundamental criticism of FPTP, that a large majority of votes may play no part in determining the outcome. Alternative electoral systems attempt to ensure that almost all votes are effective in influencing the result, and the number of wasted votes is consequently minimized. Gerrymandering. Because FPTP permits a high level of wasted vote, an election under FPTP is easily gerrymandered. Through gerrymandering, constituencies are deliberately designed to unfairly increase the number of seats won by one party at the expense of another. In brief, suppose that governing party G wishes to reduce the seats that will be won by opposition party O in the next election. It creates a number of constituencies in each of which O has an overwhelming majority of votes. O will win these seats, but a large number of its voters will waste the votes. Then the rest of the constituencies are designed with small majorities for G. Few G votes are wasted, and G will win a large number of seats by small margins. As a result of the gerrymander, O's seats have cost it more votes than G's seats. Manipulation charges. The presence of spoilers often gives rise to suspicions that manipulation of the slate has taken place. The spoiler may have received incentives to run. A spoiler may also drop out at the last moment, inducing charges that such an act was intended from the beginning. Spoiler effect. The spoiler effect is the effect of vote splitting between candidates or ballot questions with similar ideologies. One spoiler candidate's presence in the election draws votes from a major candidate with similar politics, thereby causing a strong opponent of both, or several, to win. Smaller parties can disproportionately change the outcome of an FPTP election by swinging what is called the 50 to 50% balance of two-party systems, by creating a faction within one or both ends of the political spectrum which shifts the winner of the election from an absolute majority outcome to a simple majority outcome favoring the previously less favored party. In comparison, for electoral systems using proportional representation, small groups win only the proportional share of representation. Issues specific to particular countries. Solomon Islands. In August 2008, Sir Peter Canaloria commented on what he perceived as the flaws of a first-past-the-post electoral system in the Solomon Islands. An underlying cause of political instability and poor governance, in my opinion, is our electoral system and its related problems. It has been identified by a number of academics and practitioners that the first-past-the-post system is such that a member elected to Parliament is sometimes elected by a small percentage of voters where there are many candidates in a particular constituency. I believe that this system is part of the reason why voters ignore political parties and why candidates try and appeal to voters' material desires and relationships instead of political parties. Moreover, this system creates a political environment where a member is elected by a relatively small number of voters, with the effect that this member is then expected to ignore his party's philosophy and instead look after that core base of voters in terms of the material needs. Another relevant factor that I see in relation to the electoral system is the proven fact that it is rather conducive, and thus has not prevented, corrupt elections practices such as ballot buying. Advantages: preservation of one person, one vote principle. The arguments for a plurality voting system rely on the preservation of the one person, one vote principle, as cited by the Supreme Court of the United States, wherein each voter is only able to cast one vote in a given election, where that vote can only go to one candidate. Plurality voting systems elect the candidate who is preferred first by the largest number of voters, although this need not be an absolute majority. Other voting systems, such as instant runoff voting, party list proportional representation, a single transferable vote, also preserve OMOV, but it is not as obvious that they do so, because they rely on lower voter preference to enable a candidate to earn either an absolute majority or a quota, respectively. Moderation: some other voting systems can end up giving a greater chance of victory to a candidate perceived as having extreme views. Under the first-past-the-post system, voters are often afraid of wasting their vote on a candidate unlikely to win, so they vote for the candidate they perceive as the least bad candidate who has a chance to win. Advocates of plurality voting suggest that this results in most serious candidates having to present a fairly moderate of centrist position. This is debated by advocates of other systems, who argue that ranked voting systems are cardinal voting systems, by getting more information from voters, allow a more rigorous definition of the word moderate, and can be designed to explicitly favor candidates fitting that description. Advantages compared to proportional representation: plurality is often conflated with single-winner voting systems in general, in order to contrast it with proportional representation. In this context, it shares advantages, such as local accountability, with other single-winner systems. International examples: the United Kingdom continues to use the first-past-the-post electoral system for general elections, and for local government elections in England and Wales. Changes to the UK system have been proposed, and alternatives were examined by the Jenkins Commission in the late 1990s, after the formation of a new coalition government in 2010. It was announced as part of the coalition agreement that a referendum would be held on switching to the alternative vote system. However, the alternative vote system was rejected 2-1 by British voters in a referendum held on the 5th of May 2011. Canada also uses FPTP for national and provincial elections. In May 2005, the Canadian province of British Columbia had a referendum on abolishing single-member district plurality in favor of multi-member districts with the single transferable vote system after the Citizens' Assembly on Electoral Reform made a recommendation for the reform. The referendum obtained 57% of the vote but failed to meet the 60% requirement for passing. An October 2007 referendum in the Canadian province of Ontario on adopting a mixed-member proportional system, also requiring 60% approval, failed with only 36.9% voting in favour. Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Republic of Ireland, Australia and New Zealand are notable examples of countries within the UK, or with previous links to it, that use non-FPTP electoral systems. Nations which have undergone democratic reforms since 1990 but have not adopted the FPTP system include South Africa, almost all of the former Eastern Bloc nations, Russia, Afghanistan and Iraq. List of countries. Countries that use a plurality voting system to elect the lower or only house of the legislature include